Welcome, we're starting now. Here is Josh Kaufman, our moderator.
Hello, thank you, Eva, and welcome to all those that are joining from online and you in your workplace or at home. We appreciate you all being here. We have a tremendous session coming up today. As you see on the screen, it's all around communicating and managing transformational changes. So we have a great lineup here today with us. First off, we want to thank our speakers and our panelists that are on that you see today. Right now, you see our photos on there, but really wanted to do a quick introduction. Before we get started, we do want to welcome you to the PRSA Midwest District session that we've had. We've had several other sessions earlier in the year. We do want to welcome you and also advocate for you using the chat. Whenever you have any question that comes up in between the questions that we have, do add that to the chat. I will bring those questions up during the session, and our speakers will be interacting with you as time allows throughout that. We will also have a Q&A session at the end of the session as well. So feel free to hold on to your question if there's a pressing question that could take more time, but also feel free to add it into the chat and we will sprinkle it in throughout the session as well. So with that, I want to introduce myself and I'll hand it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. My name is Josh Kaufman. I serve as chair-elect of the PRSA Midwest District Board and treasurer before that. I've worked in the change management and PR industry for more than 16 years, both within Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and government agencies. And so with who we have with us today, we have Barbara Spitzer, we have Greg Vola, we have Josh Greenspan and Jennifer Baghdad, four tremendous leaders in change management and public affairs. And I will hand it over to each of them to do a brief introduction of their experience in past, and also to help us understand the question of how would they define change management. That's often a question we get in the public affairs industry as well as change management. So based on their decades of experience, how would they define change management? So I'll hand it over for the experience question, and that question to first off, I see at the top of my screen Barbara, and then Greg, Jason, and then Jennifer. All yours, Barbara.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, Barbara Spitzer here. I just wrapped a 35-year strategy consulting career, most recently with Accenture. I focused on the people domain of business my entire career. And I actually helped EY build its first change management methodology. Some of you, I'm sure, have never heard of Daryl Connor. Maybe some of you have. Yeah, okay. We did a lot of silly things back then, but I've done change management my whole career. I'm now in the portfolio stage of my career. My advisory business, Two Rivers Partners, Human Capital Advisory. I sit on 3 nonprofit boards as well as corporate boards. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And hey, everybody. Hi, my name is Greg Voller, and I am pleased to be here with you. My career spans over 30 years, and I've had the good fortune of working across the Midwest with great colleagues in Minneapolis back in the day, in Chicago, and living here in Milwaukee. I am a senior director and team lead at Gagan McDonald, based out of Chicago, where I lead one of our consulting teams. My career spans 30 years of really organizational communication and change experience. I also, you'll see my designation of CCMP. I'm proud, along with Josh, to be just one over 3,000 certified change management professionals in the world by the Association of Change Management Professionals, which I am proud to continue to serve on its global board of directors, and it was honored to serve as that organization's president for 2 years as well, too. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Great. I think I'm up next. Hi, everybody. Jason Greenspan, Senior Vice President at the Grossman Group, which is an internal strategy and change communications firm here in Chicago. Been at the Grossman Group for a couple of years, but prior to that, spent over 20 years at McDonald's Corporation, most recently leading the internal communications arm of the function. And I think there, and beyond that, spent years in chief of staff roles, strategy roles, et cetera. So bring kind of a multidisciplinary perspective to change while never having sat in an official change management role.
Hey, everybody. Jennifer Baghdad here. I am super excited to be with y'all today. And I am an independent consultant. So I have been more or less working solo for the better part of the last 20 years or so. It's been a great experience for me. And while doing so, I've been able to work with global companies, and local, also area organizations. And my trajectory has really led from doing straight up public relations, media relations, to internal communications, and then really focusing in on change very specifically for the last 10 or 12 years. So it's just been fabulous to help, and all of the media relations and public relations experiences I've had have really been able to ground into where we are today, where I am today, and being able to help global organizations navigate this big beast called change.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. Before we go to our first question, I also wanted to thank Eva Kaiser, who's on the call. She's our event manager, and all the other items above. You saw the e-blast come out. She was a past president for PRSA Midwest District and continues on the board as well. And we're thankful for that. So thanks, Eva, for setting this up and being a part of this as well. So we'll head right into our first question for the panel. So really, two-part question. How would you define change management, and why is it important for PR and communication practitioners to learn about change management? So what is it, and why is it important for PR majors to learn? And this is open-ended. Anyone on the panel can answer it at any time.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. Never to leave an open moment, but it really, and it's such a good question to really ground us, Josh, because, one of the things you had asked of us panelists, even before we got started, is kind of giving a thought to what does change mean, and providing some feedback on, how it's important, which is exactly the question here. And, my feedback, my comment is that change isn't an option, it's a necessity, and communications, and effective change communications is our compass for getting there. Because change is really about helping people transition from a current state to a future desired state. And it's doing that through hearts and minds, to help achieve whatever that desired outcome is in support of an organization's goals and objectives. So that is really critical. And understanding, the reason it's so important for us is that understanding the nuances of change, it's another tool in our toolbox. And that really is, as communications practitioners, is how we operate, it's how we deliver, is applying all of those tools and what makes best sense to support each organization.
Yeah, if I could just add, I'd just like to add ditto right on to Jennifer, and maybe just introduce one additional element that I think also too you were getting at in your description. It's also a structured approach, and it's it's not something ad hoc. I think that there's a process and an opportunity for how you really structure things, and I don't mean to mean that from a program management type of perspective, but to be very, very thoughtful, in the activity and the approach and the process. Whatever process it may be, in that activity as well too, and just to get to then what Jennifer is describing as well.
Maybe just to add, oh, go ahead, sir.
No, Jason, you go first. I'll go
I was
after
going
you.
to say that to build off what Greg is talking about. So beyond it being a process, I'd also throw something else into the mix, and that is that change management in some respects is really leadership. Because if we think about it, good leaders facilitate change by listening to people and kind of understanding the varied perspectives. They articulate, a direction that's clear and simple. So they paint a picture of an end state. They connect people to that direction. They understand what might what might get in the way of achieving that direction. They build alignment. So all those kinds of things that are important to change management processes is also really kind of what leadership is about as well. So I think just sort of adding that dimension in as we think about what change is and how to maximize it and how to drive people to action.
I'll quickly just share maybe a slightly different perspective. Having grown up in a large integrated professional services firms my whole career, pushing change management into large technology implementations. Thank God I don't have to do that anymore. But it's not a thing, it's a capability, and it needs to be embedded. Everyone needs to know how to do it. And I think about it on two levels. The strategic level is what PR and comms are all about. It's stuff you all just said. And then there's a whole bunch of operational tactical stuff that has to get done, that under the hood HR junk you got to do to, pay people the right way, motivate behavior. But it's really the strategic thing that I think is so important for this community.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you all alluded to it very succinctly too, is, there's two sides of change management, right? I know this session's focused on what is the internal communications and the change management methodologies that we can incorporate to be successful, but also there's sometimes change management affects external communications too, that we'll talk about in the next few questions as well. And so I think Barbara has a great background in terms of how to embed change management internally through technology. And as you see with Greg and Jason, with that external communications experience and internal, and you have Jennifer also with that pure change management approach that Barbara and Greg and others are following as well. So if you have any questions for these folks on the call, feel free to add them in there. Again, they have a plethora of background and experience, and we're lucky to have them today. So take advantage of the opportunity. So as we go to the next question, kind of alludes more into external, but also internal communications and the change management that it follows. When we think about the ecosystem of the mergers and acquisition space occurring more frequently, right? How should PR professionals shape executive and enterprise messaging to manage these organizational changes? So when we think, Barbara and Greg, about M&A, how can PR professionals help shape that executive and enterprise messaging to manage these organizational changes? Are there tips or tricks through your experience that have helped you lead those type of communications?
I'll go first.
Sure, go ahead, Barbara.
I'm going to start with a story. My brother Rob is on this call, and he's a storyteller professional, so hope I do it justice here. But so what do you think happens when a company actually alters or eliminates what people describe as a life-changing product? Not good. So how many of you have read about the Peloton Lululemon partnership? Put in the chat a big smiley face if you're either a shareholder or a Peloton user. Put a frown face if you're a Lululemon user. I'm a Lululemon user. So this partnership is really great for shareholders. It's really great for Peloton because nothing's really going to change for their users. But for Lululemon, it's going to be tough because it is a lot of takeaways. And the communication and change management of this partnership was really botched, at least for the Lululemon. We all got this email that says, hey, oh, you're going to love this. It's so great. We all know, home fitness boomed during the pandemic. Lululemon was an experience. Like people love their instructors. You get call outs, you celebrate your birthday, you community on a huge community. And so that's going to be going away. Lululemon's going to make the apparel, Peloton's going to make the content. So there's a huge uproar on social media. First, a lot of crying, complaining, a lot of cattiness, things people said about the poor Peloton instructors. And Lululemon was just tone deaf. They didn't have answers to any of the questions. We're going to discontinue the hardware. Oh, we're going to service it for a while. They're going to live classes, maybe for a few months, but we're not sure, etc. You get the picture, right? Pretty miserable. And so, what I think comms and HR people need to think about is, are you ready? Are you ready to communicate? And if you aren't, and you don't have answers to all the questions, be honest. We don't have answers to these questions, and here's when we're going to have them. And listen, don't be tone deaf. They really never showed up on the community site to really respond and quell people's fears. But the other side of that is you got to let it play out. I mean, let people cry, complain, and moan. Because today I read a post where someone said, I took a Peloton class and I was really disappointed that I wasn't more disappointed. She actually liked the class. And so, that we got to let it play out. We got to treat people like adults. And I think for professionals in HR, you got to make sure you're not dealing with intermediaries. You're working with the C-suite. You are coaching the executives on how to be authentic. You're checking for readiness. You're making sure all the questions are answered and things like that. So whether it's external or internal, but I do tell this story because I was like, boy, that was really bad. And it really actually isn't so bad at the end of the day.
Barbara, that's an awesome one. Let me pick up on that because I think for this audience, where I would expand on that is I would have you really thoughtfully think about your point of view. When I said earlier that the process, is part of structured process, part of change, The way that we think about a gig at McDonald's in three components. One is a compelling story, interdependent components. One is a compelling story. The second is aligned leaders like Jason was alluding to. And third is the intentional experience roadmap. If I go back to the compelling story, I think the pitfall that too many organizations fall into is they have the wrong point of view. What do I mean by that? Is that a story is only compelling from the lens and the view of the audience that you're trying to impact with all of that. So one of the things that I would advise you to think about, a starting question is for whatever stakeholder groups, what are they looking to overcome? And how do you know that? Don't presume that. I see way too many organizations presume they know what XYZ stakeholder, what their issues, their challenges are. And I would just encourage you all to go validate whatever those assumptions are. I think that's the basis then of what provides really the incredibly important inputs into how organizations message around change to both external and internal stakeholders going forward. The one other added layer I would include in that is that I also see too many organizations way too vague about the actions that they need from their stakeholders to drive change. And so what we're trying to do is that we're trying to, based on those challenges that individuals can overcome, what are the actions that are needed, and what's that going to look like too as we go forward in that approach? So we kind of flip it. I see sometimes PR professionals, communication professionals almost go like this cadence of know, believe, do. I think that's the wrong order. I think you have to start, what are they looking to overcome? What are the actions you need? And then build on the perceptions and the information that's vital for folks to understand as well.
Yeah, great call out. They're both good points as well. And so that kind of leads into something you were saying earlier, Barbara, about technology implementations and where does change management fit in here? And for the folks on the call, as mentioned, I was lucky to be in both spaces, right? Public affairs and change management is a part of communications. As you know, whether you're using LaMarche, PRSA, CCMP, any type of methodology that's out there, right? Communication is one of at least 4 levers that change management pulls. And so you already have the skill set of one of those 4 crucial critical elements. Think how much more marketable you'll be with the rest of those. So that's something to help define the why this is important for us in the field. But going into the next section of, as you look at as change practitioners or as mentioned as PR professionals, if you are changing the company culture with communications, or you're driving adoption of a new technology in the organization through communications, or there's a business process change that you need communications around for internal comms. The question is the adoption of a new company culture, technology, or business process by a client or agency requires a change management methodology, right? To ensure employees are ready, willing, and able to accept it. What steps, and this is questions for Jennifer and Jason, what steps should an internal communications professional follow to ensure a successful rollout of a new company culture, process, or technology? So what would that look like in terms of framing a communication, the rollout, the key stakeholders? What would you do to ensure a successful implementation?
Do you want to start, Jason, or you want me to start?
You can go, Jennifer.
Okay. Well, I mean, as we've already heard, and Greg talked about it in his intro, Josh just talked about it as well. I mean, this is a structured process. This is something that we just don't throw caution to the wind. Same as in developing our communications plan. It's a structured process, right? We think about it from a very methodical approach and from A to Z in order to deliver a strategic value to our business partners or our customers or our clients, right? So there's, as Josh was saying, multiple different kinds of methodologies out there. For example, PRSA, they focus on preparing their 3-phased approach, right? Prepare, manage, and sustain. One of the clients that I work with has their own in-house methodology, as many do as well, and theirs is align, explain, model, and enable. I think you're starting to see, based already on the conversations that we've been having here, that there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of threads here that are in common, which is, and I'm just going to name a few, and then I'll turn it over, which is engaging our leaders right from the beginning to advocate that change and to be visible during the change. That is really critical part of the process. Understanding the change, we talked about the know, see, feel, do. I totally don't disagree, but it's understanding what that shared vision is, agreeing on that shared vision, and then drilling down to really understand, well, what is the change and its impacts, the from to better because. What difference is that going to make? Understanding what the risks are, what the priorities are, what the challenges and opportunities, because that helps us be what we are, which is storytellers, to tell our story of the why and how this is going to work better for us in the future. Stakeholder management is something that we always are focused on also. And then building that comms approach, like we were talking about. A couple of differences here too is helping leaders navigate their own change journey and helping them lead other people. That cannot be undervalued or overstated, because just like in communications, when we, especially in media relations, when we talk to our customers and clients and they're like, no, I don't need to practice. I don't need to think about my, you gave me key messages. I don't need to, I got this. And then they do an interview or something and it's totally botched. This is the same kind of experience where if you are not preparing, and it's even harder because you're dealing with human emotion. So if you are not preparing for the human emotion on the other side of the table, then that is a significant risk that can truly backfire. And then the last thing I'll say before turning it over is recognizing progress, right? We never remember to do that when all is said and done. It kind of peters out and everybody's like, okay, we're on to the next thing. So.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Jennifer. You were talking a little bit about kind of the human struggle or the human challenge during one of your answers. So maybe I can start and actually build on that. I think when I've seen changes be the most successful, it's the organizations or the initiatives within the organization, the leaders who don't necessarily view change as an exact linear process, right? We know that it's not just about moving people necessarily along the typical change curve, which everybody's seen sort of, since the early days of their career, but rather we know, I think in any change or any big transformation, employees go through a range of emotions. They oscillate a lot at various stages. So it's almost like kind of an EKG with lots of spikes and troughs. So I think one helpful way to think about it is, and there are always going to be missteps. So try not to manage a typical change curve, but rather recognize that it's those oscillations along the way that you need to be prepared for and think through, kind of as Jennifer was talking about. So that's why we metaphorically think about it more as a wave versus just discrete exact up and downs. So thus, I think, if you buy that, if you agree with that, then our job as communicators is to help minimize the oscillation of that curve, if you will, and make the endpoints of the curve sort of more compressed. So what does that mean in practicality? I think from my experience, it's a lot of the things that have been covered already. It's, defining the end state and the why, right? Having your story and understanding why people should believe it and how you might connect with them emotionally. It's knowing who's impacted and their various levels of influence, knowing that it's not sort of a peanut butter spread. Everybody is impacted differently, and there's different strategies sort of depending upon your role in the organization. I think a step that's often missed in the process, and Greg touched on it, is understanding why people might resist or support the change, right, at a pretty deep level. So why should they engage? Why might they resist? What do they need to overcome? What's getting in the way sort of emotionally? So keeping those pieces in mind. Another one that hasn't been touched on sort of as you think about the steps is training frontline leaders to understand that it's going to be sort of that oscillation, and how do they sort of identify resistant points along the way, then kind of manage those dips to keep people engaged. And then I think finally, my last point, because there are a lot of communicators on this call, is when it then comes ready to sort of the communications part of the change, I think there's a few things to keep in mind. Number one, involve employees. We know that people don't necessarily resist change. They rather they're more likely to engage with change if they're part of it, if they can identify with it. I think it's talk plainly and talk frequently, allay their anxiety, talking probabilities. Don't wait until the end of the process to communicate. Everything doesn't have to be perfect. I think obviously favor in-person dialogue. And then finally, I think be really cognizant of the way that communication can impact change. So that means if you're an employee sitting in the organization, what do you sense? What are the cues from leadership? What are the actions, symbolic or otherwise, that you see? What does leadership alignment look like? Where are they aligned? Where are they not aligned? So thinking about all the stuff that like creates the daily stories in the organization, that's the stuff that sort of drives change or causes people to say, I'm not on board. So you need to think about that sort of holistic approach from a communications perspective. And that's all stuff that's in our wheelhouse. So I think those are all things to sort of keep in mind as you think about the steps to driving change or transformation. Sorry, long-winded answer, but hopefully that's helpful.
Absolutely. I think it's helpful for a lot of the folks on the calls. And I think I can already envision in the future co-authoring books with many of the people on the call right here when it comes to change management. So much good knowledge pouring out to all of us on the call. One thing I wanted to add, if I may too, one other thing, when I used to work in, a lot of us did in external communications, internal comms, as well as the others. And one thing that's helpful is when I changed when you think of external communications and the influencers that we identify, whether it's Instagram, whether it's social media, those folks that will help launch a product, influence a product, think about that scope externally, but what does that mean internally? And so what do we set up internally is a change management network for a lot of our projects and programs that will help influence those changes and resistance. So think of it as an internal influencer group and setting that up for those changes or the big changes, saying who can influence and create testimonials of the positive changes that they're already seeing and experimenting, and how can we use that leverage to bring the others across that haven't experimented with a new change, whether it's technology and business process. So external communications persons, you have an advantage as well as internal because you've already done it externally. Now you have to reshape it, repackage it, and what does it mean internally if you were to adopt a change management methodology? So that's where I think it helps kind of bridge the two as well. So great comments all around. So as we head to the next question, it kind of goes into a similar route. So when we think about internal communication professionals on the call or external communication professionals, what type of skills or behaviors would they pick up if they went more into a pure change management role, or if they were to adopt certain methodologies? Are there certain aspects that you think that they will become better at or can add a skill set that they may or may not have today? So what are those skill sets that change management methodology or practice can bring to public affairs professionals? So that's the question. That's more for Jennifer and Greg. Any call outs?
I'll start, and Jennifer, please add. So as I think about this, I think a lot of skills and competencies have already been shared by the team here. The one I maybe want to just put a little bit more color on is what I would almost call is becoming a student of behavior, a behavioral scientist and a behavioral artist all at the same time. And here's what I mean by that, because Barbara mentioned earlier of this notion of readiness. I think one of the big opportunities from a change perspective is how we as professionals can really be thoughtful about assessing and identifying and understanding why stakeholders resist. And what are the drivers of that? What is creating that? How are we almost like behavior ethnographers to some degree in that regard? Because I think that type of skill and capability, assuming that we validate that again with those stakeholders, I think it just gives us a rich view in terms of how we can shape deliverables, work with our leaders, help drive their alignment, et cetera, with all of that. And I also base this on, Josh, you mentioned this earlier, you mentioned LaMarche. I'm a big student of LaMarche, and I was fortunate to be a facilitator of the LaMarche model. And I really believe one of these base principles from the LaMarche managed change process and approach is that change is always a choice. People will always choose if, when, and how, to what degree they will change. And we have a responsibility and opportunity through our capabilities, our competencies about understanding what's helping influence that choice to help make that happen. That's why I kind of put this combo of a behavioral scientist and a behavioral artist together, as kind of a core competency here as well.
Yeah, that's 100%. Resistance is real for the people. I mean, we think about it in our own lives, right? Where we don't want to have to make those changes. And I'll just add on to this a couple of things. Everybody on the phone should feel really comfortable and confident that as PR professionals and communications professionals, you have the skill sets already in your tool
Agreed.
belt to do this, because what makes us great PR people makes us great change management people too. So what do I mean by that? Being able to do those things like running communications plans and stakeholder analyses and leadership engagement, but it's also some of those soft skills like active listening, adaptability, collaboration and teamwork, project management, especially for those who are involved in crisis on the phone, remaining calm. Because again, when you're dealing with the human element, there's a lot of people who may not be and feel calm. So how do we help navigate through that? And I'll just add maybe a couple of other things that aren't potentially as much in the PR skill set, which includes really having a good sense of cultural sensitivity. So understanding whether it's across culture for folks who are working with global organizations, regional, there is a big difference even within a state, and I'm in Minnesota, the Twin Cities versus outstate, and that's the same with most big cities. This is very different kind of feeling and way that they like to receive communication. Another important part of this is legal and compliance. Depending on the kind of change that you're working on and where it is, there could be, and especially within the HR side of the house, but we're seeing it more in tech spaces too. There are legal requirements that we need to be sensitive to and work into our change comms approaches. So.
Yeah, great call. It's one thing I'd add to that too, in being in the space too, is I think, Greg, you alluded to the facilitation part of it. I think after I went more fully into change management, of course, still in public affairs and marketing as well, is around being a more proficient in learning and development and training, overall leading training, the trainer sessions, making sure that I'm looking at the user experience. Again, I think public affairs come with a strength with that. You're already viewing how the customer will receive this information. You're already viewing how they'll receive this training, and to get into the weeds of, okay, if I'm starting from the point A and I need to get to point B, what is all the information do I need to know to be successful in the new environment or in the new? And I think that emboldens you in change management. Another thing I think too is, I think Barbara alluded to it earlier, is technical writing is a different animal, right? But it's something that if you start to get into technology space, it's a completely different mindset. You're thinking very process oriented. It's a very technical ecosystem and structure. It's a different skill set for public affairs to get into the weeds of things. You can still stay strategic, but you also are tactical. But that's something else that excites people or draws people away. So it just depends on which side of the coin you might be on, but it is a definitely another skill set that can be added as well. So great call outs. I think we'll shift to the next question. All good. We could spend the whole day on this. We have such good knowledge and subject matter experts on the call. One thing I was going to ask is about when it comes to, is there any experiences that you all have that in which you manage a challenging change management issue where both external and internal stakeholders were affected? So it could be a merger acquisition, I think, to that extent. It could be branding changes internally. It could be technology products that are coming inside or outside. Just wanted to see, as the two areas merge, external and internal communications, is there a client that you had or others that maybe there was a business case on a change that affected both internal and external stakeholders, and how did you manage that? This can be for anyone, actually. I do have Barbara and Greg lined for this one, but if others have any things that come to mind, feel free to add into this as well.
Greg, you want to go first? Oh, okay.
Either way, go ahead, Barbara. I'll follow.
I have no examples, by the way.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding, of course. I have too many. One really came to mind when I saw this question. I do a lot of work in the resources industry, utilities, oil and gas, and we were working on a transformation of a utility that it was preparing itself to be acquired. And one of the work streams was moving to a performance culture. they're 2/3 represented employees. And so I had the honor of running a series of meetings with the union leaders. There were 6 unions, and some of these leaders were like from Canarsie, Brooklyn. You know, Canarsie, Brooklyn, New York. It's a rough and tumble place. And so anyway, the CEO kicked off the meeting. What was the first thing he said? Well, you know, the bus has left the station. You're either on the bus or you're not on the bus. And the CHRO and I were like, oh. So the meeting was a disaster. It was horrible. I still have the tracks on my back because the union did not like that tone at all. And so, you know, I ran a series of workshops, and it was really convincing the union to accept performance metrics. You know, not just you get a raise and a bonus because you are entitled. And it was pretty radical transformation. And we actually ended up getting most of what we wanted. But I would never want to do that again, because it was bringing, you know, multiple external stakeholders together. Did a very poor job preparing the CEO. I'll take that one on personally. But it was just it was a lot of discussion and dialogue, and you know, all the things that we've already said here. So it was a very, very good learning experience early in my career.
So what I'd like to add to this is, and I get the spirit of the question to really kind of have us think about the uniqueness of external and internal. But what I would also say is that there's very few, if hardly any, that I think of changes that don't have an impact both internally and externally. And so I would just have us think about that collectively. And I think it was Jason who said earlier about it's always around the why. Well, part of the why is always ultimately somehow is how you're impacting a customer in one way, shape, or form or another. A couple of quick high-level examples is we're working with healthcare insurance providers. And as they're looking to, you know, drive growth, there are some significant market limitations that that are impacting a particular example. And all of that then is the why in terms of how the organization is thinking, acting, and leading differently in order to spur and achieve growth. And so I always think that these are always very related. And if you're not with your internal changes, even if it feels like it's a systems change on the inside, it still has an ultimate impact on the value or the value creation of how your customers are being served. And the other thing I wanted to maybe bring into this as well, too, as we think about stakeholders, even more so in today's sort of very gig economy-like type of world, is that we're always speaking to prospective employees or people who can serve an organization, and to have them be very top of mind as a stakeholder group, you know, within an organization. So for a big box retailer a couple of years ago, we were working on their whole return to office, you know, type of program at the corporate level. And we had to very much keep in mind, in addition to their current employees, it was just as much of what their prospective employee base was thinking about this and how we're responding to that and how we're influencing their perception around that then as well, too. And so I think that marries into this whole example of external with internal as we look at this as well, too.
Well, those are great comments. We're seeing some good comments in the chat too about that. Is there, you know, when you think about change management communications and the public affairs folks on the call, internal or external, what are some of the key metrics that we look for in terms of change management communications? You know, how were they successful in terms of adoption rate, or in terms of what are some ways in which some best practices in measuring the success of change management efforts or communications? And this is really a question for any of us in the call. So feel free to add. What would you say are the best ways to measure the success of change management communications?
You know, this is a tough one. And I did a project for American Express, and we had a dashboard, and we had pulse surveys, as we always do. And the CFO was a finance transformation. He really loved the dashboard because we measured things like message uptake. You know, we would ask people, you know, do you understand, you know, the vision for the change or whatever? And so it wasn't just a smile sheet, you know, it was pretty qualitative nonetheless, but it was, you know, very practical. You know, we found a way to measure behavioral change as observed by managers and supervisors, and found a way to aggregate that before digital technology and any of that other fancy stuff was available. But I do think it's getting down to behaviors and what people know and don't know and how they feel. Hard things to measure.
Great call out. There's a follow-up question in the chat from Chris. He mentioned thinking about companies that are undergoing prolonged periods of change. How do you help them manage through the very real issue of change fatigue? What are some ways to get through change fatigue that you've experienced? This can be anyone on the call as well.
Well, I'm going to connect that, Josh, back to also that core question around measurement, because I think it goes kind of together with that. So on the aspect of change fatigue directly, I think it's because organizations, frankly, and one of the things I mentioned earlier is around an intentional experience roadmap, is I think organizations have an opportunity to strengthen what that experience roadmap is, and certainly to acknowledge the energy level. And we're all dealing with different energy levels in a post-COVID world in how we work and how we interact. It's all unique now. I'll just say it that way. But with change fatigue, it's something that is, I think, as you look at the combination of how you really think about all those touch points, how you really build that empathy of leaders, and again, shape that story that's compelling to the stakeholders. I think those are parts of it as well too. How that relates to measurement is the following, and I get kind of zealous on this one. I think our profession, we become too defensive on measurement. And absolutely, as Barbara said, it is not easy. I think we should be more bold. I think we should be more assertive. And I think that we should be proud that we are impacting an organization. I think what we need to always recognize is that if we don't have a clarity about the organizational or business impact that we're looking to address, if we need really solid clarity on that in order for us then to really then be to be bold in how we can then talk about then the measures then that can contribute to that. And I agree from what Barbara said, it's behavioral, it's also adoption. And then a finance person would love this next one, is what is the risk? What is the risk percentage that we're willing to tolerate in terms of how we're looking to achieve our results here? And the last thing I'll say about this, and I apologize for going long, I love what General Electric put into the universe about change. They have a very simple equation around change. It's the following. The results that you're looking for is a factor of two items. It's the quality of the solution multiplied times the acceptance and the adoption of the solution. If you have minimized the acceptance and adoption, all of that investment you put in this quality of solution is suboptimized. I think that's an opportunity for us to put that into practice as well too.
I just want to add and piggyback on what Greg especially has said, because one thing I often tell my clients that they don't like to hear is that communications exposes operational deficiencies, and this is the same in change too. And if you don't have that clarity right up front, and I saw a question in the chat about leaders not aligning, which is part. It's not only our responsibility, but it's part of our responsibility to point out, to what Greg was talking about, that risk of here are the pros, here are the cons. And that's one easy way for us to be able to help strategically be thoughtful about guiding our leaders down that path in measuring that success. Another thing to measuring success is, there's, I'm sure people are very familiar with pulse surveys and that kind of thing. There are those kinds of surveys, but, also, just like when we do communications plans and we want measurable objectives, create measurable objectives with the team, with the project team right up front. One thing that's very easy to track and measure is retention rates among employees. So, if you're going through a large scale global restructure, or even, national, whatever kind of restructure, how many people did you have at the beginning and how many people did you have who are leaving of their own volition? So
yeah, those are great 3 points.
Which sort of has been touched on, but back to sort of the change fatigue, I think it's really important too to be transparent and set realistic expectations, because I think we've seen too many companies, leaders say, once this change is done, we're done, right? And it'll be back to business as usual. I think we need to acknowledge that there really is no business as usual, and we shouldn't try, leaders and organizations shouldn't try to sugarcoat what's happening and sort of the external context and the environment that's causing continuous change. So I think being really honest about it, I think goes a really long way.
And I think you picked up nicely when I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat that kind of allude to something you said earlier, Jason, about leader support and making sure that leaders have the information and communications to be successful. And I see two questions in the chat, one from Caitlin, one from Angie around, how do we prop up leaders first to be fully aligned to what the end state looks like at the beginning, and also to make sure we're preparing our CEOs to communicate in the way that needs to be communicated based on these changes. So how do we, I do have an example I can share on the latter approach too, project, but in efforts regarding supporting your CEOs and messaging and so forth. But are there certain tips and tricks that we'd recommend to our viewers right now about any advice for managing change comms to fully align leadership is the first part of that question. And second of all is how do we make sure the CEO, if it's within a certain company, is communicating in the way that needs to be communicated, even if it's against their usual style of communicating? How do we prepare them, and how do we make sure that they're consistent to manage the changes? So that's two parts. Anyone can kind of chime in. Yep.
Really quick, Josh. I learned the hard way that you got to speak to a CEO. Someone said this with risk language, financial numbers, and that's the only way you're going to compel them to, take things off the plate. There's a question on that. Communicate the right way. There are plenty of CEOs out there who understand change management and they value it, and it's just they embed it. But for those who don't, you just got to go in speaking their language.
Yeah.
I think just a tip.
Well, and I pick up too on that, because I think also Caitlin's question about, leadership not fully aligned and what the end state looks like. Well, hardly that ever happens, and being facetious, right? I mean, that it may not be part of the change comms responsibility, but boy, what an incredibly important need and opportunity for how that alignment can be facilitated. And I think one of the illusions of change is that everybody believes that there is a clear, crystallized state that people are going to work towards. That is rarely the case. And it's how much though of what can be put out ahead of you that is magnetic, that's attractive, but that is not as precisely known. And I think sometimes some leaders have a desire to have as much precision as possible before they'll be convinced in order to proceed. That's not an easy challenge to overcome. And it has to be done through ongoing facilitation, ongoing test and learn, ongoing ways that can demonstrate, hey, we're working towards something that is 80% clear, and that's okay. And that's going to be, again, I like to use this metaphor, it's magnetic enough to pull the organization forward.
Yeah, maybe a practical example of that. It was spent 22 years at McDonald's, and it was there when business was going well for a period of time, but the company needed to do some things pretty significantly different in order to sort of compete. So just as a starting point, we said that the beginning of the change process in that case needed to be opening the leaders' minds and creating an experience for them that would allow them to see things from a variety of different perspectives, not tell them what to do, not tell them exactly what's changing, but help them sort of draw their own conclusion. So very tactical here, but it was kind of interesting. We created a gallery walk of sorts, which was kind of a three-dimensional experiential series of moments that allowed them to see things from a lot of different lenses: competitive lens, restaurant workers lens, customer lens, et cetera. And then you sort of facilitate conversations around, so what does this mean? Where does this lead us? What are the implications, et cetera? So not to go too far down a tactical path, but it's a little bit about sort of opening minds at the beginning to get leaders to sort of embrace this instead of telling them, here's the change and here's what you're going to do and here's what the end state's going to look like.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just have one comment, and then I'll go back to my moderator role again. And the question is, since we're all in the similar fields, one example I can provide too that's similar to what you said is one of my roles in the past was helping lead change communications for mergers and acquisitions as a consultant. And we had a parent company absorbing a holding company, and the holding company was absorbing another company in another continent. My role is to help draft the CEO communications that was around what changes are going to come, from everything from Workday is going to go to a new IT system to the HR benefits of one has a pension, one doesn't have a pension. The culture change is completely different from a traditional parent company to a more startup feel. And so having those conversations of being able to draft the communications and say, yes, if we use this verbiage it speaks well from a business perspective and a business corporate speak perspective, but when it actually translates to the people in the field and the people, the users, it's going to be completely different. So having those conversations of saying, this is great for a corporate mentality, but when we get down to holding companies and companies that do not have a direct connection to the parent company, subsidiaries, this is how it's going to be viewed. And actually being able to draft those and saying, this is how, this is before, this is the after, and this is the plan for all the upcoming changes we have, from IT systems to culture changes to HR benefits to your 401k match, even that's going to change 6 months from now. How do we retain employees, to Jennifer's perspective, while keeping the ship going in the right direction? I think those go far. So the
Wait,
next
I just have
question.
one more thing, Josh. I just wanted to add
Yep.
to that super quick, which is we talked a little bit earlier about the change curve and also about stakeholder analysis. And you went through a great example of really understanding your stakeholders, but from a leadership perspective, they're also going through a change curve. And so they need to be brought along that journey. And so include them as one of your stakeholders and think about how you're communicating what we as communications people need to do to help them be successful in their change.
Great point. We have one or two questions here, and we'll jump right back into the chat. We have a lot of good questions coming through there. So keep up the questions. We'll answer as many as we can. We have about 6 minutes left. One question I have is, when you think about the field of change management and public relations, right? They're interconnected, they're intertwined, they're all PR professionals have skill sets in change management, vice versa. They're not really separate. When you think about, how do you see the field of change management in PR evolving or integrating in the next 5 to 10 years? So, none of us have a crystal ball, but based on the sentiment and the factors that we look at today and the clients we've served and helped out with, how do we see that evolving, PR and change management, in the next 5-10 years?
I'll hit that quick. Digital and AI is obvious. We know technology is transforming what we can learn, what we can know. Neuroscience is really exciting for me. Why do people resist change? What goes on inside the brain? And I think that, marketing professionals have used this science for a very long time to get their products out there. But I'm really excited about that. The last thing I'll say is I'm working on a proposal to do a human capital strategy for a nation that has come into money. And they need to develop their labor, and they're really focused on PR because they want to be seen by their own people, but other countries as really contributing to the goodness of the world. And I never thought about PR in that context: governmental, economic development, country development. It's so important, I think, that we use this tool that professionals in this field bring to get the message out about all the good things that are happening in the world, to help lift people up.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, go ahead.
Well, just building on Barbara, thank you, Jennifer. I think the merging of these disciplines is all about continuing to shape influence. Just like Barbara was saying. And I'm going to speak just real 30 seconds from my professional association hat, the Association of Change Management Professionals. That group is already partnering with the International Coaching Federation. It's already partnering with the Customer Experience Professional Association and others that are all sort of intertwined into all of this. And I think it was said earlier, this field of communication has always been a key part of change. And I think the more that we can look at the influencing capabilities of what our profession provides, that is critical, just as Barbara said, it's critical to the positioning of change going forward.
I think one of the things that I've seen come to light even more recently is generational differences between boomers all the way down to Gen Z. And I feel like while there's always been generational differences, somehow they're much greater between generations than have historically seen them. And it's probably due to the pace of technology, among many other reasons. But a lot of the younger generations are extraordinarily focused on purpose, right? And so when that comes to like DEI and sustainability, mental health, all of these things are really critical as we're thinking about change, as we're thinking about what that actually means from a PR perspective and a reputational perspective from our companies. I mean, there are a lot of examples of that out in the social media land right now.
great feedback. It looks like we've got all different angles covered there as well. And I wanted to, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, Jennifer, already. How do we apply some principles of change management to ESG, DE&I, and other hot topics that are taking place today? Are there certain ways, both internally and externally, that we can apply some of these change management principles to those aspects? Wanted to see if there's any additional ways that we feel like would be more pertinent to ESG initiatives, DE&I. How does it intersect?
So
Can we
funny.
use that?
You would think that, you would think that, with everything going, not everyone believes in climate change, so I'm not going to assume everyone does, okay? But we see the signs of it. You would think there would be all this motivation, how much change management do you have to do? But at the end of the day, when it comes to ESG, whether it be environmental or social, you feel the pain, your pain management. That was a Daryl O'Connor concept. I don't think pain management is working because we're not changing fast enough. So I do love the question. I don't have an answer, but I do think that there's an opportunity for everyone in this profession to play a big role on the global stage, back to my last point.
I think it comes down to purpose. I mean, if your leaders are really aligned around purpose and vision in these spaces, then that's a part of our job and responsibility, is to help bring that to life. And part of what we see or don't see is a lot of still trying to figure some of that out.
I think it's probably about those things are so important, but it's about, if we go back to sort of the employee viewpoint, it's about integrating all of that into the business. It can't be separate activities done in vacuums. Otherwise, I think more often than not, back to the question on change fatigue, people are just tired. And as important as those things are, it feels like a separate set of activities, things people need to do, things people need to think about, things they need to act upon. So to the degree that it can be integrated into the core narrative and the flow of the business, I think the better.
Yep, absolutely. Well, first off, I know we're at the top of the hour. I think you alluded to kind of the answer, Jason, to Andy's question in the chat too, about how to bring two teams together, how to integrate. Andy, your question was around what's the best way to combine plans when two previously separate teams are joined together? Basically, it's managing the stakeholders. And what I would suggest there is, take a step back and figure out kind of what is the problem we're trying to resolve, and which plan or tactic in those plans most effectively does it. And that's your way of kind of integrating both, so they both feel part of the team. They both have actions from both plans to integrate. And so at the end of it, you can become one team at the end. That's what I'd suggest. So kind of pulling back to the team. Well, first off, I want to thank the speakers for being part of this. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Greg, Jason, and Jennifer. You've added a lot of value. We're very thankful to have you on board. Thank you for those in the audience for submitting your questions, being part of this as well, and being part of the PRSA Midwest District family. So we're fortunate to have you all on board. We drive the PR industry. We want to lead both PR and integrate change management into the PR industry, as well as we talked about. So thank you all again. This is recorded, and I know we'll have that as part of our Midwest District board, and appreciate everyone's time and contributions. And we'll see you again, hopefully on an upcoming session. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Wow.
Make it a
Thanks,
great one,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.